Hello, everybody. Welcome to the fourth official episode of the Permissionless Learning series. Before I tell you guys what this concept means, be sure to follow us on Clubhouse uh, so that you never miss any future events. Permissionless learning simply means that one shouldn't have to seek any permission from a certain institute or corporation to seek knowledge or to learn a particular skill. With the infinite resources available in this day and age, it is possible for us to move towards a self learning approach. Our today's speaker, Mr. Arun Dwivedi, has been working with the Indian Space Research Organization for about a decade with a focus on developing metallic materials, which is his I'm sorry. Uh, he's been working into metallic materials required for various aerospace programs. He is also responsible for ensuring the quality control activities of these materials that are processed through different manufacturing processes. So let's start with the first question. Can you tell us about your journey?
Yeah, thank you, Madhvi. Thank you for the introduction. Uh, Regarding the journey I had so far, I am basically from Kanpur, Uttar Pradesh. I did my BTech from REC Warangal, and I had been associated with ISRO from 2011 onwards. And 2011 was the year when I have introduced to the space community where we are dealing with different launch vehicles. So, in the last 10 decades, we have come across the different challenges in the different manufacturing segments related to materials manufacturing, how to improve quality, and some challenges in the launch vehicle side also. So in the last, if you see our major the milestones, what we have seen over that 1 decade was like we had one Mars mission, we had the geostationary communication satellites. So this journey started, with the when as a new engineer when I joined ISRO, I was only knowing some basic concept, not through depth knowledge of the various manufacturing processes, NDT requirements. What do you mean by quality of aerospace component? I just had a general basic things, but as we move on, we have come to know different new technologies. Uh, the revised one, like what we have some 1 decade back, now the same thing is available with the many more advanced features which is more suitable for our quantifying the quality of our materials, especially for critical aerospace applications. Then this overall quality requirements of beginning from the scratch to the end product and delivering it to the project. So this way, I feel you people would have heard about the much expected and uh, much familiarized Mars mission, which we have done, I think, some 4 years back, and it was really one of the challenge. Yeah, Mangalyaan. It was really a challenge. It was not directly related to the our mankind kind of thing, but it was a new challenge as far as exploring the interplanetary missions. So,
Right, right.
so this was the thing. Maybe when we move ahead, I'll share some more experience and challenges what I have come across in the last 1 decade after associating with our ISRO.
Yes, that was interesting. So, in permissionless learning, we talk about how people from different backgrounds can learn different skills and go into the particular field. So can you tell us about some learnings that you learned individually without having to seek any permission from your institute, a skill that also helped you uh, getting a job at ISRO?
The main thing
The main
was
thing was
how to handle the equipments. For characterizing a materials, there are certain tools which is known as a specific metallurgist tool, which includes your like microstructures to characterize the materials, like having basic details about these thermal sensors to monitor that temperatures. Certain devices, like you would have come across some gauges to monitor the pressure and other variables.
Yes.
So when I was in institute, uh, these all are part of as a theoretical knowledge. Yes, there will be classes, and we may get exposed to what are the theoretical, so many laws and so many corollaries and all. But it was really interesting when I got a chance to have to wet my hand on this instrument, and this has really helped me when I joined in the ISRO. There also, being in a quality department where we need to characterize the materials in case is there any problem, and in case we have to qualify some new materials. So really, like this different metallographic techniques, mainly the common one is the optical microscope. This has really helped me while entering in the ISRO as a new guy. And when my seniors saw me that I had some preliminary knowledge and I can handle some basic things, so the further learning and further picking up was easy and faster. So that really helped me.
Yes, I do agree there. A scientist should know how to use his instruments. Moving forward, can you tell us about your the most interesting project you worked on during your undergrad and at your company as well? The company that you were into before joining ISRO.
Fine. Before joining ISRO, for a short while, I worked with the Welspun Corp Limited, which is also having their main plant is in Gujarat, mainly in the district known as Anjar and in Vadodara, and their head office is in near Mumbai. So while working there, I got a challenge of developing the API grade steels. This most of the onshore and offshore activities, they need API grade steels. API means it's nothing but a institute name, which is known as American Petroleum Institute. They basically deals with the certification of what kind of material has to be used while putting the big pipelines for supplying the this gaseous things, as well as oils reforms and all. Sometime depending on which country the project is, sometime they have to deal with the onshore activities that is very near to the sea level and all. So that was one of the challenge. I believe when I joined there, that was a new project we got. And even one of our head that time, they were also in the in the kind of discussion that what need to be done, what is the right manufacturing. We were having the rolling mill, but what are the right manufacturing parameters, what chemistry will give us, because it's like a not a general structural application kind of thing, not the general grades which are readily available. So that was one challenge. And as a new engineer there, I got this challenge with the full support of my seniors, and I took it up and we did some trials. And after that, it was a great success. We could able to deliver them right from the beginning, from the plate to the pipe, and it was qualified, and I think after that we got a full order of that API shore onshore applications. So that was one challenge, which that was my first challenge, I can say, which I have been uh, entrusted after joining after starting a professional career.
That's interesting. So, following up on the answer that you gave, so I believe in the saline water or offshore and onshore, any material that, if we consider a block of a XYZ material, which is on the ground, and one which is in the saline water in the sea. So, can you think about any material that behaves exactly the same way I mean, gives out exactly the same properties in both the conditions? I believe salinity has a lot of effect on the material behavior and material properties, and also the water corrosion that would happen on the material. So, any material you could think of that behaves exactly the same way in both the cases, and a material that behaves completely different when it is in the water or it is on ground.
Yes, Madhvi, I think you have asked very good questions, a very good question regarding this. And just I will explain some basic, and then I will come to your answer. Uh, what is happening is, when we work in the normal ambient temperature, almost all the materials they behave, they will meet all the specific requirements, and they may not show any much abnormal behavior. uh, it is almost similar to like us, when it comes to humans also, we will say that the real test of man's begins or humans begins when we are under some extreme conditions, like under stress, like under the condition which we are not favorable, which we are not just familiar with. So the same happens with the materials also. In the normal conditions, everything will give you the results. But when you are having some conditions like inside the water, you are having a corrosive atmosphere, as you told, then temperature also will be slightly lesser than your room temperature, ambient temperature. Then other factors like there may be some salinity, there may be some others, some elements also which may not be which may not be some having a good impact on the materials. So there is the main challenge, what kind of material we can select. For example, we can take steel. You can find steels a lot of product in with the steels, but and that same steel you can use in in onshore application also. But the thing will be, the life of the your project, the life of your like in this case it was a pipe, a fuel pipe supply kind of thing. So the life will be drastically reduced, because this steel, which is not meant for offshore, if we are using, it may give up, it may withstand this adverse situation, but slowly and slowly it will give up, and the life will be hardly for 1 year and 2 year. So there's to increase the life and to reduce the risk of failure, we are choosing, either we are making the available steel itself by altering some tweaking some chemical composition and giving some kind of protection coating and all. Either we will make the available material itself suitable for those conditions, or we will go for any other alloys which is having superior such properties. So in this case, if you take what we have done, we have customized a new grade. Earlier, if you see, if any one of you can just Google it, API grades, you may find there are varieties of grades are available, starting from grade 20 and going up to grade 70. Now I believe people are talking about grade 80 and grade 85. These grades are nothing but, it is just by altering some chemical composition and some process optimization, they have just mm, enhance some of their characteristics so that it can be made useful for their application point of view. So that way, what we did, we were having some API grades. We have gone through their chemistry. We have understood their characterization, and then we understood what are the lacunas, what are the points where we need to enhance, we need to support it, and accordingly, we have just did some modification in those areas alone where we need to strengthen that grade, and it has been given a new name that grade was API 70. And by making such alterations, the same material, the same parent grade, which got a new name, has been successfully implemented and used in those adverse situation also, which was considered as a not favorable situation for their parent grades. So that way, the main material what we are doing as a main material people is that first we get the information that what are the application, what are the condition we have to face or material has to face, and then accordingly either the existing grade or a new grade of the same parent material, or in a rare occasion it may happen that we may feel that there is a superior different alloy itself is existing, which can be used for getting more superior results. So either we may go for an entirely new alloy. So this way only we are judging, and this way only uh, we are making sure that the right material should get the right application.
Right. This is very important.
Arun,
I've taken, yeah, John,
Yes,
you
John.
continue.
Arun, when you are talking about this corrosion and all, hello, Arun?
Yeah, John.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you're
Yeah,
audible.
sorry. Actually, when you're talking about this corrosion and all, so this is an electrochemical process taking place between the material and the environmental factors. Huh? And
Correct. Correct. Correct.
without any interference by us, this process takes place.
Correct. Correct. Correct.
Can you tell something about the like I see it from a philosophical aspect, okay, this thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is like something like, see, you compare the metal to a boy,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the water or the saline water to a girl,
Okay.
and
Or you can. Oh, okay.
they are in love, and they
Okay.
just are getting together, and that forms corrosion. Why
Okay.
are we trying to remove it, and why do not we develop such processes in by which this energy, this electrochemical energy which takes place during the corrosion, it itself is
Okay.
healing the material, or or giving more integrity to the material. Can you talk about such technologies?
Fine. Fine. Here only, John. One small thing I want to say, that we should not compare this saline water to a girl. Why? Because this saline water will act as a, it will have a very adverse effects. So it will it's like you can treat it as a villain.
Okay.
So okay, girls also, so girls also can be villain, but let us.
Okay.
So what is happening is, as you are right, if we assume that, so uh, if suppose by having such process where the two elements are joining and we are getting a positive effect, then yes, we are encouraging such process. Like if you have seen in most of these techniques, what we are doing to prevent the corrosion, what we are doing, we are we are introducing some elements intentionally to make sure that instead of this materials mingles with some other elements and get it health deteriorated, it will mingle with the element which we want
That
to
is
him to
that
mingle.
is like arranged marriage.
Yeah, you can say like arranged marriage. So if you see this corrosion, if you see this corrosion techniques, or this what we are taking the preventive steps, one is the passivation, pickling and passivation. So passivation, what we are doing? we are enriching the surface with some elements like chromium, and we deliberately want this material to make a chromium rich oxide in its surface so that it will be in contact with chromium only, and it will not further come into contact with any kind of any further impurities or any other particles or elements which are present in the atmosphere. So thus
No, I am asking Arun, are there any such research going on so this is and all like you are telling chromium when we are putting, so it is an external factor we are introducing, and there is process cost involved in everything. So
So,
what
correct,
I am
uh,
correct.
saying is, don't.
before, hello, sorry to interrupt you all. Let me introduce John to the audience first. John works at ISRO, works in the same department as Arun, and yeah. So, Arun, sorry, you can continue.
Yeah, John, you are asking.
Yeah, so why not we try to use the natural processes and avoid this processing costs? Like in aluminum case, what happens? So why are we not making such novel alloys?
No, that is also there, John. If you see, we are having a series of allies, but what happened, John? Sometime the situation demands that suppose we have to meet 10 requirements. So our alloy, which may have some poor corrosion resistance, but it is meeting the nine requirement with a plus grade marks. So
Yeah, yeah.
only one lacuna he may be having, like we may be good in maths, we may be good in physics, but sometime we may not good in chemistry and all. So
Yes.
same way, so in that way what is happening is, although there may be a novel material available which may be having this 10th characteristics much superior to this one which we are going to select, but since this candidate is having nine good characteristics and only one thing is lagging, so just by giving such kind of this passivation kind of some external things, we may make him that he can do the job, he can become the best candidate. And other thing, John, while selecting this materials also, the cost also plays a major role. The readily availableness also plays one role. So what we are making sure that ki suppose if a readily available candidate, if a local candidate, we can groom it to the level that it can take care without having much investment. So that will be our first option. But as you rightly pointed out, yes, I think work is going on. There are many allies which even people are telling that you put it in the any environment, any harsh environment, and you forget about it, they will take care, nothing will happen to them. Such kind of things are also there.
So, following upon what you said, you were talking a lot about alloys that are currently being used in the space industry. So, can you tell us about any super alloy that is currently being used for space missions and that are changing the dynamics of metallurgy or material science?
Yes, Madhavi, very interesting question. If you see our aerospace application, what happen is you can divide the entire launch vehicle into three segments. One segment will be which is experiencing a lot of high temperature, like you can see the nozzle end from where this fumes after combustion is coming out. Then second segment you can say that where there may not be a much a temperature variation, but there may be some structural load is coming, so it has to be a more stiff. And third segment you can divide into those segments which are facing a very less temperature, even less than the room temperature of the order of 77 K. So now the super alloys, as the name itself is, super, they are not an ordinary alloys, they should be treated as a like Superman. So what happen is, in the harsh situation where your temperature is very high, a normal alloy cannot withstand such temperature. So we need some Superman kind of alloys which can not only withstand such a high temperature, but they can performed also, they can give a very good performance even such harsh environment. So we are using, typically if you see the superalloys which we are taking care is mainly of nickel based superalloy. We are using cobalt based superalloys. We are having iron nickel based superalloys also. So these alloys, their main characteristics will be at such a high temperature, they will they will have a very good heat resistance, they will have a very good strength, they will, even at such a high temperature, they will not undergo any kind of deformation, which we called in a technical terms as a creep and stress rupture strength. They will all withstand. And in that flume whatever they are coming out, you may see it will be oxygen enriched, so there is always a chance that some kind of oxidation happens. So these alloys will also have very good oxidation resistance. So these are the main characteristics of these superalloys which we are exploiting and making it in our favor to be used at those segments where such harsh condition of high temperature exist.
Right. This was a very interesting answer. So, coming down to a subject that I know many of the audiences would know about is additive manufacturing. So, many of the rocket engine parts are currently being 3D printed by many companies like SpaceX and many private companies and also NASA. So, does ISRO also 3D print any of the metal parts, and how what is the process that involves the 3D printing?
Yes, Madhvi, again you have put a very good question. I can tell you 3D printing is the future, and it is having a capacity of replacing so many process like casting process, like your forging process. Right now, as you told, Americans, Russians and all, they are far ahead from us, and they are, I think they have made even small rockets, one complete stage by 3D printing. Although we have not reached to that extent, but yes, we have also started manufacturing the small component. And you know uh, to use, to adopt any new process in the critical application like aerospace segment, it needs a lot of qualification. It has to undergo a lot of tests, lot of qualification. First we give emphasis on generating a lot of data so that we can get confidence. And then once we are confident about the process, then only we will integrate such process component into the launch vehicle. So if you talk about ISRO, we are at the stage where we are doing all this qualification. We have made the components, and we are characterizing the different properties considering the so many vast parameters. uh, so we have not reached to the stage of implementing it right now, but we have. Now coming to the what are the various additive manufacturing process which are gaining momentum all across the globe. So I can tell you, you can find, people are giving numerous names of their process, but I to keep the things simple, I'll just tell you to remember only three things when it comes to additive manufacturing process. The first thing is what is the source. Most of the additive manufacturing process, they are using the lasers as a source to melt the feedstock. Then second thing will be what is the feedstock you are giving. Some people are using the powder particles as a feedstock. Some people are using the wire kind, in the form of wire, same chemical composition electrode for the feedstock. So this is the second parameter. And the third parameter is what kind of equipment you are using for doing the 3D printing. So if you combine these three parameters, you can make so many permutation and combination, and you will come to know so many names. Like you may come to know about one typical name is powder bed fusion process. It's additive manufacturing. Powder stand for the feedstock which is used for printing the component. Fusion means the process in the machine, that is it is completely melting it. So powder bed fusion process, so there will be a bed kind of thing within the within the 3D printing this chamber, where the powder will be, will be spreaded, and the laser will come and it will fuse the powder. Then once it is fused, again the second layer will come, and like that it will continue till you get your finished component. So these are the, so if you see these three parameters what I have told, whatever name you will come across, you will be able to analyze it, that what kind of 3D process it is. So this is the brief about additive manufacturing. And as I told you earlier, that it would take some more time for us to fully fully understood, fully characterize the different alloys via additive manufacturing route, and then only we will be uh, integrating this process components in our launch vehicles. So far we have not come to that stage.
So,
Okay, right.
if I just jump in here, Madhvi, because this is very
Yeah.
interesting to me. Just for 2 minutes. You mentioned that, Arun, you mentioned that 3D printing is the future when it comes to these processes.
Yes,
But
yes.
like currently, we are in a very nascent or early stage of that. So, are there any specific challenges that come to mind when you're talking about 3D printing through like fusing powder or extrusion or any of those processes?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Abjit.
Abjit.
Very good. I think a very good question you have asked. The main challenges what exist is, you see, first thing is the maximum machine or equipment which we are having to build a 3D printing component. This is one limitation. Like a small component we can build, but suppose if we have to build a 42-meter tall launch vehicle, so it's a challenge. So one challenge is the size. Then second thing is, as your size increases, what happen is in this process a directional melting is happening, so a directionality come into the picture. But if you see, what we want is, we want isotropic kind of things. That means in all the direction we want uniform properties. But the challenge in the additive manufacturing will be, the more the size in one particular direction, you can say the z direction, that is the third dimension, there will be there is all, we have also seen that there is a chance that the properties are getting deteriorated. So this is the second challenge. Then the third challenge is when it comes to a complex shape. So what happen is, we have to give some kind of support. Otherwise, because of its own weight, it's a possibility that the entire structure will get collapsed once it reaches to some threshold weight and all. So we need to, for complex geometries, we need to have a provision that we should give some additional supports. So that the complex shapes also we can able to realize without wasting much feedstock or input material. Then there is one more interesting point. Like if you see that most of this additive manufacturing, they use the powders. They want powders as a input material. But if you see, for general alloys, like if you want aluminum alloys, some general grade, if you want steel, some general grade like austenitic stainless steel, these powders are readily available. But if tomorrow some requirement comes where we want to have a component by 3D printing by some specific super alloys, so to get that desired powder for starting the additive manufacturing process is itself is a challenge. So people are working on that. I believe now if you see, people have already come up, especially the Americans and Europeans, and they have they have developed a series of powders of a series of alloys. So that is also one thing, but still there are certain things which even most of the scientist communities are also telling that these realizing the powder itself is a challenging task. So for some particular alloys, we are not opting for additive manufacturing.
Actually, in this additive manufacturing, Arun, now
Yeah,
even 4D printing has come up. So in 4D
yeah,
printing,
yeah.
basically what happens is this external stimuli when we apply, like when we are talking about this Z directional problem and all. So by having some external stimuli, it becomes a time dependent process. I just wanted to add in that also.
Correct, correct. Yeah, John, you have told correct point. This 4D, this thing is also there. So by this kind of some advancement, we are also hopeful that whatever the drawbacks which we are thinking today, we may able to overcome in future.
Yeah, and the other aspect is the cost dimension. Like to develop even a complicated casting, it will cost you around 1 or 2 lakhs. But I think the same thing in 3D printing. Around, you have any idea how much it would cost me?
It will be around some, the cost wise, it is higher only as compared to investment costing. But what we hopeful that since because it's a new process, people want more to characterize. So that is why now their cost is some 20 to 25% more as compared to the conventional casting process. But over a period of time, when it will be well understood like some other conventional process, then I believe cost will also get, it will reduced and it will be almost either it will be in the similar lines or sometime it may become cheaper also.
Yes, Arun. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting question, John and Abhijit. I wanted to ask. Arun and John, both of y'all work into the quality department and the testing department. If I think about testing products that are made into the automobile or space industry, there are two kinds of testing. One is destructive testing, and one is non-destructive testing. So my question is, what kind of testing procedures are used when it comes to a 3D material, 3D printed material, versus that of a traditionally made material like forged, cast, uh, casting material or forged material or material that has been machined? What are the differences?
Yeah, Madhvi, it's a very, very good question. Once again, that too with quality point of view, it's a very important question also. So the main difference will be, Madhvi, like we first of all we have to understand the process. So as I was telling you that in additive manufacturing, there is a chance that we may get certain properties deterioration in one specific direction. So if you see a general process like a forging process you take, what we are doing is we know we have taken the input stock, we have done the forgings, we have brought it to the finished component. So we know that there is no directionality. So we are testing in X direction or Y direction. Here X direction I can tell you it will be along the forging direction, and Y direction will be perpendicular to the forging direction. So instead of calling XY, I think this will be more appropriate if we define in terms of forging direction. So in additive manufacturing, what is happening is we have to add the testing requirements in apart from these two direction in some inclined direction also. So here the testing, direction is governed by which direction printing is happening. So this is one thing. Second thing is in our normal forging operation, where all the parameters and all are almost freezed, optimized, there is we are not disturbing it. So what is happening is this machine level qualification and all doesn't come into picture. But when we go for the additive manufacturing, machine, the equipment which is going to build the 3D printing is also one important factor. So a machine qualification also comes into the picture. Now when machine's qualification is coming, then we have to ensure that the entire corner, the entire space of that chamber, machine chamber, should get qualified. So our testing plan will be entirely different as what we are following in a conventional forging process. So their number of samples will be more. Then nature of testing will be almost the same, because nature of testing depends upon the alloys and the application. So if suppose if you are doing a super alloy by forging, and if you are doing a super alloy by additive manufacturing, since we know that the final application is high temperature, so the nature of testing, like stress rupture test, creep test, mechanical property test, these and all will be same. But yes, there will be a demark difference when it comes to the sampling plan, which counts how many number of sample in which direction. And the second thing, when it comes to non-destructive part, so yes, there will be a significant change. For example, in case of forgings, if you see, ultrasonic testing is one of the mostly used, common, and popular this non-destructive test which we are using. And depending on the shape and the size of the product, we may choose whether we have to go for a longitudinal wave test, or we have to go for shear wave test. Basically we call it normal beam or angle beam. But when it comes to additive manufacturing component, what is happening is we have to see what kind of component uh, we are building. Then second thing, what kind of nature of defects we are expecting. So unlike forgings where we will see the defects like cracks will be there, sometime burst will be there, alligator kind of thing will be there. So in additive manufacturing, those defects will be entirely different than the forging process. Here we are most likely to get like gaseous porosities. We will be get some fusion, lack of fusion kind of thing. That means two layer, when we are fusing it, it is not fused properly, there is some gap. So depending on these factors, we have to select what is the best NDT method we can use. So unlike in forgings where we are using most commonly ultrasonic testing, here it may happen that we are going for radiography testing, which is having more probability of detection for volumetric kind of defects, like gaseous based and any voids and any kinds of lack of fusions and all. So in NDT, this kind of changes will come, and overall the testing mechanism will be governed by uh, what machine we are going to use, what is the size of the our component, and what is the shape of the component, whether ultrasonic is feasible. If not feasible, radiography we have to anyhow we have to do. And for doing radiography, once again we have to make a plan that how to keep the film, how much area we are able to cover. So these kind of differences will come when we qualify, both a conventional process with additive manufacturing process.
Right.
Arun,
That was
actually,
interesting.
mm,
Yeah, John,
Arun,
you can continue.
yeah, Arun, actually, so since we were talking about radiography and ultrasonics, and this is permissionless learning, so I believe, these kind of small certification courses about ISNT you can enumerate,
Yeah, yeah,
Arun.
yeah. Yeah, okay. Like John has bring out a very relevant point, which all the organization, especially the defense sector, aerospace sector, avionics sectors, they always see this as a preliminary basic requirement. So the person who has to evaluate, who has to do this kind of non-destructive testing, so there are certain professional certification course which will be run by the forum like ISNT, ASNT. So depending on your experience, depending on the nature of work, and the how long you have you have exposed to certain NDT techniques, they will be giving a personal certification of level 1, level 2, level 3. So these kind of certification is like a added confidence to an individual as well as to an organization who is going to take or who is going to give such kind of evaluation responsibility to individual, that yes, this person is capable of handling and evaluating uh, these techniques, and what are the results coming out of these techniques. These are the things.
Right. John, do you want to talk about the various non-destructive testing methods used for, I mean, the question that I previously asked to Arun. Do you want to maybe
Yeah,
add anything to that?
yeah. Actually, Arun pretty much was telling about what we are using in 3D printing and all. So, in general, I started my career at non-destructive testing only.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, correct, correct. Yes.
yeah. So definitely, like how he was telling, we need to get this certifications and all to to get to be having the skills, and according to your skills you go and get the certifications and all. So in our lab, in addition to this conventional radiography, we had digital radiography, and now we have this CT also and computer tomography. And yeah, it's a very interesting and evolving field, because as the time progresses and the technology progresses, we are going more easily into seeing inside the materials. It's just like you get a feeling like of being a doctor, like how a doctor is doing an MRI and seeing under inside you and
Right.
detecting the fault
You
and
perfectly
removing
summed
the
up it.
fault.
Yeah.
Yeah,
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 continue.
yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I'd like to open the mic to the audiences and we are talking about space exploration, space colonization in this day, and multi-millionaires are going to space to just get the thrill and know what it is like going into space. We also have this terminology called as asteroid mining, with scientists are working on mining other celestial objects, and asteroids are known to have abundance of materials, precious materials, and volatile materials like hydrocarbons, and precious materials like gold and platinum. So I want to ask this question to the audiences. I mean, what are your takes on this? Should we mine asteroid to get rich, or will it be a waste of time? Pranav, Anant, do you want to talk about it? Renuka, Bhagyashree?
You'll have
Yeah,
to
so
add them to
Madhuri,
the
this
audience, I guess.
asteroid mining and all. So the thing is, I think the person who will be able to really perform this asteroid mining will become the first trillionaire, if
Right,
I'm
right.
if I'm correct, and that is more than the GDP of many countries. Uh, so the thing is, like when see, metals are only the value we give to them. So even if you get tons and tons of gold from an asteroid and see, one aspect is to study the biology of those asteroids and look into the possibility of extraterrestrial life and other some scientific experiment. That is one thing. So I prefer that we go that route and not the route of this exploiting resources, because we have already exploited Earth. Let's not exploit space too, and let's be judicious in our approach.
Can I just jump in and say that I really, respect and agree with John's viewpoint here. It's a very, good point. Yeah.
Anant, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to talk more on the quality and testing. So, NASA in last year was able to take a closer picture of Sun's atmosphere and the layers there, with their solar orbiter coming close to almost half the distance of Earth. So, I want to know, how do you test your materials to last in that kind of heat and temperature, and how do you simulate that environment on Earth?
Yeah, Anant, I think you have, it's a very good question. So, To start with, what test we have to do? First, we are just a basic thing. I'll tell you that we have to think what can happen when you are going to such a high temperature. What can happen? So, if you see the as the temperature start, increasing, there is a chance that we may get some deformation. Uh, like uh,
Yes.
like if you keep one simple object in a very ice atmosphere, it will become freeze and become very hard. You bring it out and keep in a normal condition, it will some it will be more little bit more softer. And as you keep it in a very high and high temperature, it will be about, his strength and all will be about to reduce, and finally it will come to a stage where it will become a fluid kind of thing, like a jelly kind of thing. You would have seen some jelly pops and something is coming as a candy. So what we want to see is, if we are going to use the material in such environment, so first thing is, it should withstood it should have such strength to withstood such kind of environment. Second thing, it should not get much deformation because of the temperature. So there is what the creep strength comes into picture. Creep strength, if we define, it is nothing but at a certain temperature, if you apply certain load, so the deformation, the material should not go more than some predefined deformation. So we used to do a creep test. Second thing is stress rupture test, which is also the same way in the like the creep test. Only difference will be, while doing creep the load will be constant, but while doing a stress rupture test, your load will also vary. So these are the some specific tests which a material has to undergo just before selecting that material for such a high temperature environment.
Here, Arun, I think this silica tiles, we also do like silica tiles is predominantly used as this re-entry protection layer and all. So we also do this coordinate testing machine tests of it, and we generate the whole profile, and then the whole profile is by simulation goes through the deformation, and those loads and all are studied, and then calculations are made as necessary.
Yes, John.
Okay.
This John, what you have told now, this is the secondary part of the thing. The first part, what we are seeing is, what we are trying to evaluate is that once we are going to expose our material to that temperature, first thing is what kind of deformation it can come. Then second
Yeah,
thing is,
yeah.
to validate those things, we are having the CMM coordinates measurement also, just to quantify that whether, when we tell that the linear expansion will be only of the order of 10 to power minus 6, whether it is in line with that or whether we are getting any surprises.
Yes, Arun. Yeah.
And one more important point, John, regarding the silica tiles, you see the main application is that when we are crossing our atmosphere, or when we are re-entering in our atmosphere. So
Yeah.
because of this atmosphere, the maximum frictional effect, because of this friction, we will
Hmm.
get a lot of heat will be generated.
Yes, yes, yes.
So there, that is the reason why the silica tiles has been used. It is basically not a metallic material. It comes into the category of non-metallic and ceramics materials.
Exactly. Yes.
Anybody in the audience wants to ask any question or initiate a discussion, you're free to do that. Just apply to be a speaker, and I shall add you as the speaker. Anybody? Uh, I mean, do you guys have any doubts or questions that you want to ask?
Yeah, just I want to know how many, like, what all space exploration projects that ISRO is targeting to in the near future. So, like, we did a Mars mission for Mars exploration, but what are we doing to have, like, maybe in the solar system or beyond the solar system? apart from like manned missions. So uh,
Currently, Anand, I will be only commenting that uh, definitely there will be some interplanetary missions, but because of our limitation, I cannot brief you much about them. But like we did the Mars mission, and you know that we have, although it's a great success, but still we are not satisfied because of some disruption during the landing of our rover. So definitely there will be missions, but right now I will not be able to, tell you much about that uh, because of
okay,
our organization limitations.
Yeah, I
okay,
believe
okay.
there might even be some security concerns. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, Abhijit, there you are.
Okay, so like when you're planning a mission, which is more important to have a manned mission for exploration or an unmanned mission?
Yeah, you see, going with a man is always, a great challenge and with a great responsibility because somebody, brothers, sisters, will be going, and it's our responsibility to bring them back also safely. So with the man mission, there will be definitely challenges will be there. So what we are attempting is that first, instead of a man, let us send some humanoids kind of a thing, explore the thing, get the reliability, get the repeatability, check the parameters, variables, whether they are in line with our expectation or is there anything abnormal, study those, analyze those, and if the once we reach to the stage that yes, we are confident, definitely you see maybe the second or third flight may we may have a manned mission flight also, but not in the beginning.
Okay, so what I wanted to know is, so if we are doing an unmanned mission for exploration of any planetary object or maybe in space only, do we actually need to do a manned mission? Like, does that get get us something that a unmanned mission didn't get?
I think John is a better person to answer this.
No, so this, see, when you get into the domain of space itself, it has more been always a political domain rather than a technical domain. So it is this the impending doom of Third World War, which was I mean, diverted by this space race. So it always has space has a defense implication also, and this kind of manned missions and all are not only for pride, but also there are some certain things which are not told outside, but yeah, they do have some implications, and I believe money is not simply just wasted. We do have pretty responsible people governing these things. So I think beyond a level we should not question also, because we don't have all the necessary information due to security reasons to come to conclusions.
Okay, okay.
Uh,
So,
okay,
uh,
go ahead.
yeah, sorry, Madhvi again. But just one point, since Arun asked about future missions also, I think publicly available data, sorry, Anant, my bad. So, Anant, there is publicly available data. If you look up isro.gov.in/missions, I think that should,
Yes.
uh, give you some idea. Uh, yeah.
Yes, and I think this Gaganyaan mission that ISRO is launching this year itself, as I've read in the articles, it will carry a humanoid robot, right? Arun, John, you can
Yes,
talk
yes,
about
Madhvi,
it.
yes, Madhvi,
You're right.
yes.
So that is also, I mean, all these space agencies have been sending out dummies for testing purposes. Just initially it was animals, and then now it is dummies. So they either send robots or they send dummies for testing purposes, because we don't want another Challenger or Columbia disaster, is what I feel. And also, this is a question in particular, particularly very interesting to me. So, we were talking about non-destructive testing when it comes to objects that we can see. So, coming down to scaling down to nanomaterials, how do we test nanomaterials?
For nanomaterials, Madhu, there will be a different setup of NDE equipments. The main will be, if you come to know about this, there will be sophisticated uh, microscopes, which is like TEM will be there, which is nothing but an electron microscope. So, because when we go to the subscale level or to the level of nanomaterial size and all, uh, to get a more and more information, it is very much required that we should have the equipment also to study such kind of the spacing, which will be of the order of some nano wavelength or pico wavelength. So there we are using the this kind of sophisticated equipment. And recently, there is one new technique which is known as EBSD technique, which is nothing but electron back scattering diffraction technique. There, by by they will be able to, by sending some waves and all, they will be able to characterize the crystal structure, grains orientation, texture, all this kind of very minor details they will be able to characterize. And I believe now it is very famous. All the IITs, definitely, all their studies will be always complemented by such kind of EBSD analysis also. So our this NDT technique, like what we are doing is ultrasonic testing, radiography, then this dye penetrant, eddy current. These will not be helpful in when we come down to such a small scale.
Right, right. Any nanomaterials ISRO is currently working on?
I think there is a lot, but I may not be able to tell you because it's not my domain. Uh, but there is a lot of materials.
Okay, so uh, I would also like to ask this question regarding biosynthesis or biomimetics. So a lot of design goes by studying animals and birds, how they fly, how is their I mean, how are the angle at which they have their wings. So design features like that, and it is incorporated into our day-to-day machines. So the eagle, the yeah, eagle inspired scientists to come up with flights, aeroplanes. So I was reading this article regarding biosynthesis of nanomaterials, or any, for that matter, any material can be biosynthesized by mimicking the nature. So do you want to talk about that? Do you have any ideas on it?
Actually, Madhavi, this biomimicking, uh, it is the with the kind of like technology we have, it has been proved that it is a very inefficient way to achieve our goals.
Okay.
So, like philosophically, people say, let's not try to mimic God.
Yeah.
So, John, to jump in here, I think the question would be sort of maybe on a more principle sort of level, seeing if biomimicry could help. So, maybe not biosynthesis per se, but the way we have aerodynamics, right, which was at least partially, through the study of nature, like Madhuri also said. So, maybe in that sense, are there any other fields or domains that might be emerging, which you might be able to, help us out on?
Not really. I'm not. I don't think I can comment much on that. Sorry.
Okay.
Arun, can you talk about it?
No, Madhvi, I think it's not my cup of tea. Uh, I also will not be able to comment on that. But regarding this biosynthesis, what one point I want to bring, Madhvi, that uh, it is not applicable for metallic materials. It is mainly for chemical compounds and other things. Uh, some work they are doing, but definitely not in the metallic materials field.
Okay, right. Uh, Anybody in the audiences want to ask anything?
Sure. Yeah, I had a question. This
Akash,
is
do you
more of,
want to ask?
yeah, am I audible? Hello?
So I have a question, or at least a
Yeah,
couple.
go ahead.
If yeah, so it's just an open question. I just want to throw it out there. But we talked about tolerances and the sort of extreme conditions that materials need to endure in space. One example that I sort of read about was the Mars rover's wheels, because apparently on Mars the environment is very abrasive. So when they sort of equipped it with the more traditional alloy wheels, those started to erode. And then NASA, I believe, is coming up with this nitinol material, which deforms. But then if you apply, I think heat or current, I'm not sure, one of those, if you apply, then it goes back to its original shape. So are there any such materials that maybe ISRO is exploring, or anything along those lines?
Yes, Akash. Such materials are known as shape memorialized. You know, like as you told, they may undergo some changes depending on the surroundings conditions. But once the surrounding conditions, it's normalized, then they will again come back and they will retain their original shapes. So we call it as a shape memorialized, and uh, I think right now we are not our launch vehicle part say we are not using it. It is not getting used, but in this satellite point of view, I think some work is going on, especially in that solar panels and all, which has to be automatically expand and contract depending on the requirement and all. I think some work is going on there.
I believe those are inspired by origami. So they inflate and they can compress back.
Yes,
Uh,
yes, yeah,
yeah,
yes.
I think DRD was involved more into this kind
Yeah,
of
John. Yes, yes,
clay
yeah.
materials. If
Hmm.
because in some
Shape memory. Yeah.
conferences I have heard some topics being discussed by DRDO people. So ISRO per se, because in our launch vehicle and okay, as Arun is saying that satellite related it might be there. So our satellite center is in Bangalore. So I am not much aware of that also.
Now, some small thing will be there like this nickel titanium. If you see, this is one of the relevant shape memory alloys. But as John told, we don't have much requirement in our launch vehicle. But yes, satellite some work is there.
I believe these kind of metamaterials are also used in soft robotics, where the robot can change its shape. Abhijit, you can ask. You had a
I
couple of questions, so you
Am
can
I
ask.
audible now?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. So I had a more general science fiction type question for both Arun and John, or anyone else if they would like to answer. But uh, what do you think of terraforming? Like, if we are colonizing another planet, I mean, we would need to set up some sort of human li livable environment there. So, I mean, terraforming, if you might heard of it, I guess mo it's mostly a science fiction concept where you, I guess, change the environment of a planet to support human life or um, or is it better to, I guess, create artificial environments there? Just a generic
Aka-
question.
Akash, so since you're talking about terraforming and all, so see, this is a very like ethical question. First of all, that the thing of sustainable development. So, do we pass on to our future generations the best abilities possible to achieve their own aspirations? And if we are terraforming and all, definitely as a science concept, so science has lot of spin-off technologies coming, like space science. Though we are wasting so much, people might say they are wasting so much money, but there are like some awesome spin-off technologies coming out of it. ISRO is working on heart pumps, so there is a lot to be done for humanity, and to reach the lower layers, and that is what ISRO is all about, to reach the millions and to democratize, and to give them a good lifestyle. So that is the philosophy which we operate. Might be this terraforming and all will be of interest to those billionaires who have a lot to just throw out.
Okay, okay, that's an interesting take on it. Arun, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, with like one aspect John has told, other aspect you can take it like the way the resources in the earth is depleting, and the way we are expanding, it might happen that we may reach to that stage where it will be a super saturated level stage. And in that case, if for the survival of humankind, if something is required, so if somebody have an idea of how to do, and how to go explore the possibilities outside the planet of so if you see in that aspect, maybe not now, maybe after some 2 decades or 3 decades, who knows, or after some 50, 60 years, if such kind of possibilities comes, maybe that time it may come handy also to save, or for our survival. But as of now, I believe I totally agree with the point of view what John has told.
Okay. Shramik, you raised your hand. I've invited you to the stage. I'm not sure. Or maybe Madhavi, you can try adding him. Mean, okay, okay, yeah, he's here. Cool. Shramik, if you could,
Hey,
yeah, hey,
hey, sorry, I got blipped out for a moment and I've been blipping out since I'm on my mobile data. So I'm really, really sorry about it.
yeah, no problem. Yeah, please go on with your question.
Yeah, so I mean, it's more or less regarding the way we perceive things. I mean, uh, we have to correct the clocks on International Space Station or every so often. I suppose there is I think there is billionth of difference in time, and they have to keep correcting it, right? So I wanted to gain more information on why they have to do that, and how does that difference split difference happen in the timings of it. Hello,
I'm sorry.
hello.
I am sorry. I am not like aware of that.
This is what I've heard before, and that the clocks on the International Space Station has to be corrected for some fraction of time, and there is a difference between the time on Earth and the time on the International Space Station.
uh, I think, Shamik, I may not be able to comment on that, as
Mm-hmm.
I really don't know the any specific reason.
Mm-hmm.
But if you say overall concept, if you take,
Mm-hmm.
we need to synchronize things with respect to our geosynchronous
Mm-hmm.
with respect to Earth rotation and all.
Yeah.
So it might be something related to that, but I'm really not sure about pinpoint answer. I don't have.
Yeah.
It might be one probability.
Yeah.
What I'm telling you.
Yeah. I could be wrong with that, and I might have the incorrect information with me, and I just wanted to get it corrected as well. It's better to go ask the experts than going on the internet and believing on the folks that actually write this stuff over there. Could be wrong and could not be wrong. So I thought maybe I'd get that concept corrected out here.
So, Shramik, I am not a scientist. I'll put a full disclaimer out there. I
Yeah.
don't know much about this either, but from what I've read, you've got the general principle right, and I believe it's more because of
Mm-hmm.
relativistic principles. Because
Mm-hmm.
it comes down to, basically, I think you might have also heard that if you're flying close to a black hole, then you perceive time differently
Yeah.
compared to if you're farther away. So yeah, I think that's something to do with it. But yeah, I think that question, uh, probably we need to see if we can find someone who is into relativistic theory or something to answer that.
Even I was of the mind that if you approach approach any object that has a lot of mass, the space time around it is wrapped in a different manner, wherein the time is perceived a bit slowly.
No, see, actually, I think this has like also relation to this the definition of meter being changed, right? So it is fixed to somehow the time. So I believe so you need to look at things from like different perspectives. Like
Mm-hmm.
time itself is as they were saying, as the relativity concept says, that it will dilate, as you are saying it, as we go close to mass. But I think on that being changed and synchronization of that clock might
Mm-hmm.
be that radiation related some issues also might be there. You just
Yeah.
explore that and enlighten us also next time we meet.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'll try to dig deeper into it, but I only had the surface knowledge about it. And like I said, I could totally be wrong, and I just wanted to get an opinion from the experts.
So, Abhijit, you had unmuted. Do you have any question?
Yeah, thanks. So I had one last question, and it's maybe a bit specific, but again, this is just from some side reading that I've been doing, because I have an interest in cars and internal combustion engines. So over there, basically, they talk about casting versus forging when it comes to designing and constructing metal engine blocks. So there's also iron and aluminum and alloys and things like that. But do we? You also mentioned, I think, John, you mentioned casting as a process. So do we also use casting and forging for the various metal parts for spacecraft? And what kind of? I think you also talked about the testing, but uh,
Y-
just maybe some more information on that.
yeah, actually we are using it in semi cryo, we are using. And I think Arun is taking care of all the quality related aspects of that, so I think he can enlighten you better. Arun.
Yeah, Abhijit. Yeah, we are also using castings, and if you see Abhijit, this casting, I can tell you there are 66 types of casting process, and the casting process is not a new process. It was even in some BCs also, this casting process was there. Earlier it was used to make this jewelries as well as your this equipments for war and all. And over a period of time this process got refined, and now the main process which we are using it is a sand castings, where you don't want much dimensional accuracy, you only want a single piece near net shape. Then we are having investment casting, which we are using for our aerospace application, not only for semi cryo but also for cusp and C25. These are the engines which we are using for, these are the cryogenic engines.
Yeah.
And Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Please continue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah. So we are using this investment casting route. Why preferably we have gone for investment casting route is that this process is capable of producing a as thin as 3 mm wall thickness, and complex shapes can be we can achieve complex shape in one go. The production rate is very high once you optimize the tools, that is the dies requirements and all the things are done, and it's only a matter of how much you can pour. So because of this advantage, we have gone for investment casting. It is also having giving a very good geometrical tolerances. It is claimed that we can achieve as close as to 6 microns. Other than this, there are processes like die castings, which is mainly used for aluminum alloys, which is having a narrow freezing zones and very less superheat. So if you overall see, as I told, there are 66 types. And why automobile is going for that? Because automobiles need a mass production. And for the best answer to such mass production is the casting process. So that is the reason why the casting process is very popular. And yes, as I told that we are also having it. And coming to the testing part, uh, I think this Madhvi has already asked how we characterize the component. So if you see that here also we do destructive and non-destructive both. And in non-destructive, it will be governed by mainly three techniques. One is the radiography, one is the dye penetrant, and other one is the visual. And destructive testing, as I told earlier also, it will be depending on the alloy as well as the application where it has to be used. So I believe, Abhijit, I have answered your questions.
Yes, yes. That was very informative. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
I'd like to jump in and ask a question. There are many technologies that were developed with the help of space agencies. One that I could think of is defense. Many of our the satellite information that we get, it is facilitated by the uh, uh, it is facilitated by all the space agencies or the geospatial data that we get. Can you guys, Arun and John, talk about any other unconventional application? I
No,
mean,
this
that was
geospatial data is basically everywhere, starting from fisheries to agriculture, which is the very backbone of our country, and
right.
then climate change and the circulation of other disturbing agents. So it's just become a very such a major part of our life that it will be better to answer where all it is not useful. So
Oh, you can talk about it.
yeah. So, and also, so when you're talking about spin-off technologies, I was, I think, telling before also that we have a project going on heart pumps in our ISRO as one of our main projects, and we have delivered artificial limbs made out of composites and all, which are used for handicapped people. So yeah, things are going on in a very humanistic approach that we want to serve the people of this country.
Right. Arun, maybe you could also add in.
I think John has covered and he has rightly told about this heart pump technology, which I think we have already developed, and I think it is handed over to some medical science institute, and they are further working on to the functionality point of view, how it can be made it realistic by implementing it on the human body. I agree with John view.
Okay. Thanks a lot for answering it. So I think we could now move forward to the uh, last part of the talk. This is a tradition on permissionless learning that we talk about the things that we've been working on uh, sharing our learnings or our projects uh, within the last 2 weeks. So maybe we can start with Abhijit. What were you working on in the last 2 weeks, or what is the things that you learned?
Uh, uh, yeah. I'm audible, right? Hello.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Hello, you're audible.
Okay, great, great. So in the last 2 weeks, again, I'm pretty scatterbrained when it comes to learning new things. So, yeah, I was sort of going through. So since we're talking about space technology specifically, I watch a little too much YouTube. So I was going through some Veritasium and some Mark Robo videos because those were directly related to space. So yeah, I was basically just learning up on the technologies that are going into space per se. So two things I found out about were one around the Mars rovers that are going. There's also Chinese rover that is on the surface of Mars, and then also around other technologies where we have space telescopes. There's the James Webb Space Telescope. So I found out that that is the successor to the Hubble. So that was something very interesting because the Hubble Space Telescope is very old at this point, and it said that it's well past its service life, and that people didn't expect it to work this well for this long. So yeah, those were two interesting, specifically relevant to these topics, things that I learned about. Yep.
John, do you want to go in second? John, are you there?
Last 2 weeks, I don't like. Okay, the learning keeps on happening at the various pace at in various things in life. So last 2 weeks, I think suddenly when you're asking, I'm not able to like collate my thoughts into something meaningful for you people. I won't waste your time with that. Please move
So
on.
I know that you are the perfect example of permissionless learning. You're learning pretty much everything on your own besides your work. Do you want to also talk about that? What you've been learning apart from your work?
You mean to say my other non-technical things?
Yeah, like, philosophy, space law, anything you
Yeah,
want to talk
yeah.
about?
Okay, so I developed a lot of interest into law after watching these YouTube videos by the one Michael. I think you people might have also seen that that topic was justice. So that whole course actually started to inspire me to take up law, and I'm enrolled for my LLB here in Kerala University. So after that, I want to pursue my space law and, if possible, do my like PhD also in the same field. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a very interesting subject.
Yeah.
Arun,
Madhvi, before we move, since you mentioned space law, that is also something I'm very interested but also very ignorant about. So, just a quick question, John. Do we have, at least for India, do we have any, formal sort of directives or amendments or any kind of, things, legislation that talks specifically around, say, uh,
Yeah.
instruments in space or something like that?
Yeah, yeah. So we have our that space activity bill 2017 with us, and unfortunately, it is still in the public domain and it has not been passed. Like I'll go into the like just briefly I'll tell you what it all about is. It's all about privatizing space and democratizing space. So they are like really encouraging private players to come and take up activities along with ISRO, making subcomponents for ISRO, doing research work for ISRO. All these things are being encouraged in that. And now recently we had also the space transportation policy 2020, and it was also up for some public opinion and all. And I also made one small video on that. So that basically still more it gives like a clear picture. It's a very comprehensive policy. So yeah, so all these things will definitely in this post-corona world, I think space will definitely be picking up as one of the hot industries.
Uh, yeah, and I had a question for you, John. So you said that you're going for your PhD. So
No, no,
before joining,
I planned. First, I have not done my space law yet. I
yeah,
plan to do it after my LLB. So that's
yeah.
a long,
So
long journey.
had you gone for a master's before joining ISRO, or did you join ISRO
No,
after?
I joined ISRO through Indian Institute of Space Science and Technology. Like I got in through IIT JEE into IAST, and that way I joined ISRO. So
Okay,
I didn't, yeah. So, but I am doing some masters in philosophy and sociology.
okay, okay,
Yeah.
I'm curious about one thing I wanted to ask John. So there is this one person called Dennis Hope. You must be
Who?
knowing him. He's sailing land
Who?
on Dennis Hope,
Okay. Ha ha
and
ha.
yeah, he's been sailing land on moon. So how did he get away those craters, and how is he sailing land on moon?
Actually, regarding that, it was something like he applied to the UN saying that he was in control of some country which was his own or
Mhm,
something, and the United Nations didn't reply him back. So he is claiming his own right over the land. And right over any land is again a very tricky issue. See, we, there are no boundaries on geography, right?
mhm,
Geography is decided by hills and plains.
mhm,
So that way, okay, it is a scam definitely for sure, and scams do keep on taking place. We have to be educated and aware and be vigilant.
mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, but yeah, that is what I wanted to confirm, because he has made millions out of selling
yeah,
land
yeah.
on moon. But I really didn't know if any individual or a country could actually claim land on any, uh, let's say, non-Earth.
No, no, no. As per United
Mhm,
Nations laws, also it is a common claim of countries and sovereign countries,
mhm,
and it is to be used for the betterment of humankind and for the utilization of uh, the whole universe as a whole brotherhood. That is the spirit with which it is supposed to be understood. The claim on Moon and or Mars or anywhere for that matter. Now I am seeing Facebook ads showing that you can become be called as a what master or something if you buy
mhm.
1 square inch of land on somewhere in Scotland somewhere, right?
Mhm.
So all these con artists are there everywhere.
Yeah, thanks for it. Maybe I wouldn't fall prey to such things now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I've also actually seen people selling stars.
Stars.
You can, yeah, you can also buy a star. You can yeah, you can buy a star for yourself or anybody you want. The money, or they charge you very less. It's very cheap, so people may fall prey to that. But I've seen my friends buy stars for their parents.
Okay.
So I think
So
when you're saying buying stars, I think you're saying the naming rights, right? So they name the star after the parents or something, or like is it their property or something? I'm not.
no, they can legit buy it. I mean, it's
Wow.
it's like just like buying some property. You have
I
it
need to
in your
look at.
name.
I want a star.
So Arun, you can tell us what you've been learning in the past 2 weeks or in the past month.
My, my learning, it is like in the my core thing only. I think whatever I am doing may not be interesting to you people.
No, you can talk about it. Everybody's interested in knowing what you've been learning and
So,
doing.
see, last 2 week as we got a challenge that we are going to replace one of our cast component by a additive manufacturing component. and that qualification part, that is how to do the radiography and all, has been interested on me. So I was just preparing how to a shooting sketch kind of thing, that how to take radiograph, what parameter is required. I was just going through what kind of defect uh, additive manufacturing component can have. So accordingly we have to fine tune our radiography parameters also, so that our probability of detection, uh, we can enhance it, and we can say that certain level of at least certain level of defect will we will be able to pick it up confidently. So I was on that. So that is what I did last 2 weeks.
That's nice. Any common defects that you
Sorry.
hello? Am I
Yeah,
audible?
Madhvi.
Yeah, any common defects that you come across while testing these additive manufactured
Okay,
uh,
yeah, that's a very
components?
interesting question. Now, what I understand, this additive manufacturing, the defect, you can classify it into two types. You see, there may be a lot of jargons, but you don't bother about that. Make the thing simple. There are two kinds of defect in that. One defect which will be lying, within the same plane, like a delamination kind of thing. Then there will be another defect which will be lying across the plane, like a loose particles, some powder particles segregated here and there. So detecting this loose particle kind of defects, which is having some volume, some jet direction, you will be all will be very confident. But there is a trick in detecting the defects which are lying within the same plane, because their the third dimension will be very less. So to improve our detectability, we have to fine tune our parameters requirements. So while going through this is what I understand, and there are people are naming different types of defect. They will tell, somebody will tell delamination, somebody will tell elongated void, somebody will tell elongated porosity. So that kind of nomenclature is there. But to keep the thing simple, I believe if you remember that there are two kinds of defect. One is across the layer, other one is along the layer. That is the gist of entire additive manufacturing
Right.
defect philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that was something interesting. I have a follow-up question to this, but I think I'll ask you that personally, and we can move forward to Shramik. Do you want to talk about what you've been learning in the past weeks?
Yeah, I mean, a bit boring for other folks. But hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, sorry. I thought there was reverberation, but okay.
Yeah, yeah. I think Madhavi's mic is echoing, but yeah, continue.
All right, no worries. So I'm computer engineer. So basically, I'm doing my work along with contributing to open source and Kraken API gateway. But apart from that, regarding space, I think I've been viewing the documentary of UFO files declassified, and it's quite interesting. I don't know. It could be weird for some people or creepy, but I do like the thoughts of alien being existing, and I'm a big advocate that human being in itself are a kind of a proof that aliens do exist. We just don't know yet if they have visited Earth or not. So, yeah, in space, it's more or less UFO and aliens. And not, I don't know if somebody wants to have a conversation about it, but that's what I've been doing this past couple of weeks.
Interesting.
On a side note, since you mentioned extraterrestrial life, one other thing I've been doing way too much of in the last 2 weeks is watching this show called The Expanse. I don't know if anyone's heard of it, and I don't know how many will even like it, but it's there on Prime Video, and I really like it. So yeah, just another thing.
Thanks, man. I'll check it out.
Akash, do you want to go in next?
Yeah, sure. So, last weekend I published a new YouTube video, so I had a lot of learnings around camera placement and mic placement and lots of failures with how I was recording. So there was a lot to learn on that. And this week, uh, on in my work, I was working on moving some pages from WordPress to our own format so that we could publicly host them and allow other people to edit those pages. So I had a lot of learning around that. So yeah, that would be me.
Okay, I'll go in next. So, I had this writing gig wherein I had to write on a subject that was nowhere near my background. I am a mechanical engineer, and I had to write about uh, a thing from, I mean, a subject which was completely alien to me. So there's this framework called as Xamarin.com. I guess Abhijit, Shramik, and Akash, you guys would be knowing about it. So I had to write about it, and basically, I did not know what a framework is. Then I got to know what a framework is, what a compiler is, and all these things can be different and same at, and similar at the same time. So this Xamarin.Forms is a framework which is based on another .NET framework and runs on C sharp. So this was something challenging for me. I had to learn it from scratch, and I have zero background in coding. So yeah, that's what I've been learning in the past week. We have Ostap here. Ostap, do you want to talk about what you've been learning in the past 2 weeks?
Thank you, but I don't learn too much about stuff in my life in recent 2 weeks. I was on kind of vacation.
Okay, so I think then we'll wrap it up. Thank you, John and Arun, for joining us today. We had a great uh, discussion and very engaging discussion. I have Yasir here. So, Yasir, do you have any questions? We are just wrapping up. Do you have any questions for Arun and John? I've invited you, Yasir. Can you just accept the invite link and talk? Okay, there seems some problem. Yeah, so thanks, Arun and John, for joining us today. It was a very interesting and engaging discussions over here. The audiences, I am definitely sure that the audiences enjoyed. And yeah, so do you want to talk about something, Akash? Do you want to say
Nope,
something?
nope. I think it was
Nope, I
a
think it was a
good session. You hosted it pretty well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So have a great day, guys. Bye bye.
Now, just a second, Madhvi.
Yeah, yes, yes.
I would like to thank you, Akash, Abjit, Shramik, and all your team, and our John, our friend John also. Today I got a new perspective that we should also see other than our core subject. So that I'm taking, as a good learning, good part of this today's session, because most of the time I'm working mainly in our core field. But today, with with the kind of discussion I had and I have observed with you all guys, I feel yes, I also should start looking, something other than my core job also. So thank you very much for this session. Thank you all. Thank you.